Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. The next game is Faxanadu. Faxanadu was an action RPG for the NES that was developed and published by Hudson Soft in Japan. However, the actual owner of the franchise this was a part of was not Hudson Soft, but a company new to the NES, Nihon Falcom. Now, we haven't really heard about them yet for good reason. At the time, they primarily made games for PCs. In my video on Dragon Warrior, I talked about how the Dragon Quest franchise established many staple mechanics of the JRPG genre. However, as I mentioned in that video, Dragon Quest was not the first RPG to come from Japan. Before console RPGs really took off in Japan, the RPG scene was largely contained within the PC market. One of the big PC RPG developers at the time was Nihon Falcom, and one of their biggest releases was a game called Dragon Slayer, which released on PC systems in 1984. Dragon Slayer was a top-down action RPG, and I've seen it cited as one of the establishing games of the action RPG genre. It ended up spawning an entire franchise, as well as a spin-off franchise called The Legend of Heroes, which is still receiving games to this day. The second game in the Dragon Slayer franchise was called Xanadu, released on PC systems in 1985. While still an action RPG, this one swapped between being a side-scroller and a top-down game. Xanadu was a pretty big hit for Falcom, selling 400,000 copies, making it one of the most successful PC games in Japan. This caught the attention of Hudson Soft, and they started negotiating with Falcom to port the game to the Famicom. This port was called Faxanadu, which was a combination of the Fa in Famicom and the name Xanadu. Now, when the game came out, it was hardly even like Xanadu. The world design and much of the gameplay was completely different. This apparently caused the game to receive quite a poor reception when it launched in Japan, as people who bought it were expecting to play Xanadu, and Faxanadu was just so different from it. Toshiyuki Takahashi, a former executive of Hudson Soft, stated that the reason the game was so different was because they thought the original game would be too tough for the elementary school children who would buy the game on the Famicom. However, Hiromasa Iwasaki, a later employee of Hudson Soft, speculates that there was more to the story based on discussions he had with other employees who were around at the time. According to Iwasaki, the game was fraught with development difficulties, with issues like a main programmer who knew nothing about RPGs, zero design documentation being provided by Falcom, and a looming deadline that forced the company to just make something entirely new instead. Now, I don't really know why Nintendo published Faxanadu in the West, although once again, we can see Hudson Soft's logo has been removed on the Western box art in favor of Nintendo's, with an asterisk pointing to Hudson Soft and Falcom's name in the back. This was the standard practice for Nintendo when it came to games they published overseas that they did not own. According to Iwasaki, the port to the NES was handled by Hudson USA and was translated to quite a few languages in Europe, which he claimed led to the game's popularity in Europe. Despite its harsh reception in Japan, contemporary reviews of the game in the West have been positive, often calling the game a hidden gem of the system. Lucas Thomas of IGN even went so far as to say it was a better action RPG than Zelda 2. So, is this game as good as the contemporary reviews make it out to be? Let's find out. After a title screen with an upbeat song, the opening cutscene shows the player walking towards some kind of castle town with a large tree next to it. The whole place kinda has a drab feel to it. According to the manual, this place is an elf town called Eolis, and this massive tree is called the World Tree. Never heard that one before. The town used to boast peace and prosperity, but after meteorites started raining down onto the tree, monsters seized the opportunity to run amok. To restore peace, you must climb the World Tree and defeat the evil one that lives in the evil place. The game started with my character entering the town. He then explained that he had been on a journey, and his hometown was not in the state he left it in. I jumped around and swung my fist for a bit before entering the town. There was an NPC right in the first area that I thought was a monster for some reason at first. In the door. Ah, are you a good guy? Anyway, he told me to see the king. I wandered around the town for a bit, and I found a person who said it was important to talk to the townspeople in this game. Oh boy, this is going to be one of those games with a bunch of cryptic hints, isn't it? I also found this priest-looking guy who the manual says is a guru. I wonder if this is Nintendo of America's no religious references policy at work here. Anyway, this guru gave me a ring, which would apparently identify who I am to the king. I took a glance at my inventory here and saw that I have gear, magic, and some kind of experience system. Apparently, monsters are even roaming the streets here as I ran into a few of them. Oh, and the monsters in this game are called dwarves for some reason, despite looking nothing like dwarves. My health seemed pretty low at this point, and after trying to punch a monster, my attack turned out to be completely ineffective and I lost all of my health. When you run out of health, you get a game over screen that tells you to remember your mantra. I I didn't know what this meant at the time, but this game calls your passwords mantras, and you typically learn them by talking to gurus. Apparently, visiting that guru earlier was enough here though, as I respawned back in the guru's house. When I respawned, my health was way higher too. Nice. This time, I just jumped over the bad guys and made my way to the castle. Here, the king told me that the wells were all drying up and everyone they sent to investigate had not returned. He then gave me a ton of money to prepare for my journey. At first, I spent a bunch of money at a couple of gyms, and initially, I didn't even know what this did. Apparently, this was necessary to wield weapons and spells. Anyway, I also bought a dagger and some kind of key that was called Key J. I also bought some meat, but this turned out to be just a life refill, and I was already full on health. What a waste. There was some other stuff to buy in the shop too, but for some reason, I just ignored them for now. With this new dagger weapon, I could now defeat the monsters in the town, although combat felt a bit janky. The way the player behaves when colliding with enemies just feels a bit awkward. At the eastern end of the town was a door that said Jack on it. Huh? Who's Jack? Well, it turns out this was where I needed to use that J key I bought in the shop. Past this point was a new area. I was basically traveling along the roots of the tree here, and there were monsters everywhere. After fighting through a bunch of them and doing some climbing, I randomly found another shop, and this guy was selling some super expensive gear. He had a magic shield and something simply titled Death. I had no idea what this was, but if I had bothered to check the manual, I would have realized that this was a powerful spell. Apparently, the deluge item I saw in the shop earlier was a spell too. Maybe I should have purchased it before heading out. After traveling a bit further, I found the town of Apolloon. There was another shop here, and I bought a shield. Shields apparently just reduce the damage received from magic attacks in this game. I also found another guy selling J keys. I guess you can buy as many of these as you want. I bought another one and continued to explore the town. In this town, some of the NPCs told me about a mattock that can be found in a tower, and they said it can be used to break walls. Apparently, it was being guarded by a dwarf. I also found a hospital, which served as a way to heal, but I couldn't afford the treatment. So, after learning my mantra from another guru, I proceeded to explore to the right. I wandered around for a bit, but my health was starting to run low. I found a doorway that led into some kind of structure forming in the roots. Maybe this is that tower the NPCs mentioned? The door cost a J key to enter, but I decided to head in and see what was inside anyway. Out of curiosity, I decided to see if I could leave the tower freely, and while I could, a bad guy immediately spawned in, jumping on top of me and took away my remaining health. Come on. This game's enemy spawns can definitely be a bit nasty at times. So losing all of your life like this can actually be pretty rough early on. I lost all my gold and experience, and worst of all, apparently you need to spend a J key every time you pass through one of those jack doors, and I game over just after wasting the only one I had. Since I didn't have any money, I couldn't afford another key, so it was already time to grind. Oh, I also found an impassable wall to the right, which I figured I needed the mattock for. After some grinding and a refill, it was time to actually take on this tower. Man, the spike enemies in here were kind of annoying. I didn't have any way to hit them when I was standing next to them. Maybe I should have bought that deluge spell in the shop earlier. Anyway, after a bit, I found these weird guys that ran around and jumped everywhere. They were kind of hard to defeat safely. I also realized here that I could farm the spike enemies for free health drops, which I could do easily if they were on a ledge. I eventually encountered the boss of the tower, this big gargoyle looking guy. Yeah, that does not look like a dwarf. This guy's attacks did a ton of damage, so I just employed a cheese strat to slowly take him out. Defeating him caused the mattock to spawn in. I grabbed it and headed out of the tower. I opened the wall with the mattock and it went away after a single use. I then decided to go back to the town and heal before going through, and I finally bought that deluge spell from the shop. This lets you fire a projectile at the cost of some magic. It also could have hit those spike guys on the ground, and I definitely should have bought this sooner. I also picked up some potions here, which are a consumable that can be used to refill life. Once I finally decided to proceed back to the right, something terrible happened. The wall respawned. Since I used up my mattock, this meant I had to climb that tower again and get another one. Ugh. I spent another J key and went back into the tower. However, it got even worse. Not only had the boss respawned, but the mattock didn't spawn in after I beat him this time. What? Did I already soft lock myself somehow? Well, apparently there was another way to earn mattocks. Sometimes in this room, when you kill the enemy on the right, a mattock will randomly spawn in. You can apparently get this even before you fight the boss. You can just skip him entirely if you know this is here. With this, I finally proceeded to the next area. I ran into all kinds of new enemies here, like these flying ghost guys and these hooded dudes that shot projectiles at me. I also found a glove here that increased my attack power for 20 seconds. I thought it was permanent at first, but soon after, a message popped up saying it ran out. Eventually, I made it to the town of Forepaw. Here, I bought some armor and a longer weapon. There were also some wing boots here, but I couldn't afford them yet. The villagers told me that I would need to find 3 springs to return water to some kind of fountain. One of these was in a place called the Tower of Fortress, and one of them was in the sky. I didn't get any clues on the last spring though. There was another key shop here, and this one had Q keys. Great, there's even more types of locks I'll have to buy keys for apparently. After this, I explored to the east and searched for the springs. I found the dried up fountain up to the north, and near it was the entrance to the Tower of Fortress. This tower was another dungeon similar to the first tower, although this one was even more mazy than the previous one. It also had one of those dwarf gargoyle guys placed in one of the rooms too, and I lost all my health to him. Strangely, this time I didn't lose all my golden experience, only some of it. I later found out that the amount of money you keep when you die is based on your current experience level. The higher your level, the more experience and money you spawn with. In fact, this was basically the only benefit to leveling up. Humorously, you can essentially buy infinite items this way, as you will always spawn with a specific amount of money regardless of how little you had before dying. Anyway, in the tower, I eventually found an old guy who was guarding the spring, and he said I needed some kind of elixir to restore the spring, but I didn't have any. Elixirs are an item that refill your health once you die. There was a bunch of jars in the tower, but most of them were just poison that made me take damage when I touched them. I think you're supposed to think that these would be containing elixirs and they were all just booby traps instead. Deep in the tower, past the snake guy, was a boss. A dude hiding in the corner chucking boulders. I just ran past him, found the elixir, and snuck behind him and swung like crazy until he went down. In addition to guarding the elixir, he dropped some wing boots too. Nice. I tried using them to see what happened, but I couldn't figure them out at first. They were another consumable, and they only lasted a brief time before wearing off. Great, I just wasted them. Anyway, using the elixir, I restored the spring. First of the 3 springs restored. After this, I explored to the east and found another locked door. This one was a Joker door, and unfortunately, the J keys didn't work despite having the same first letter. Darn. I haven't seen any Joker keys yet. After this, I went further east, but ended up at a dead end. It took me a bit, but I eventually realized that I needed the wing boots here. To use them, you had to hold up and A, which would cause you to fly while they were active. Remember though, you can only do this for a limited time, so it's not like you can just fly for forever. I flew up at the dead end and found the second spring up in the sky. I talked to another old guy here, which caused the water to spring forth. Second spring restored. The old guy gave me a hint that a guru was hidden away in the Tower of Fortress, but I think the translators just made a typo here and said guri instead of guru. Because of this, I misunderstood his message and thought he was talking about the old man that I had already talked to at the spring. Man, I got stuck here for so long. I had no idea where to go, so I just kept wandering around aimlessly. In the Tower of Fortress, there were these windows that kind of looked like doorways, and I pretty quickly realized that they were just part of the background and I couldn't enter them. It turned out, in the Tower of Fortress, there was just an obvious doorway I had to enter that I had dismissed as part of the background too. I'll admit this one was kind of on me. In here was the guru the other guy hinted about, and he gave me the Joker key. Using this, I opened that locked door and found the last spring. After this, the old guy gave me a ring that he said I needed to push a rock back up at the fountain. I went up there and did so, which led me to a door that required a Q key, which apparently stood for Queen. Oh, these are based on cards in a deck, hence the Jack and Joker keys from earlier. This door led me to a new area, which marked the end of the first section of the game, the trunk section. Up next was the mist section. This place is deeper in the tree and there's a thick fog everywhere here. There were all kinds of new enemies in this section, as well as a lot more platforming. Eventually, I found the town of Mascon tucked away back here. In this town, I learned that the mist was apparently caused by one of those meteorites I mentioned earlier. As the meteorite dissolves, it poisons the water. I also learned about some place called the Tower of Suffer. Sounds lovely. I also bought another spell here, Thunder. After leaving the town, I started to realize that this place was a lot more expansive than the previous area. There was a lot of branching paths and various dungeons to explore. I even found a few houses where bad guys lived and they just charged at me as soon as I entered. Eventually, I found the Tower of Suffer that I had heard about. This is another dungeon with a bunch of branching paths, and there's these weird guys with long legs that have a bunch of life. I died here to one of those gargoyle bosses and decided to explore some more before coming back. I found another dungeon around here, but the only thing inside was a single potion. It wasn't really worth it considering you can buy these easily from the shop. I also found a ledge I couldn't reach without the wing boots, and annoyingly there weren't any wing boots in Mascon, so I had to go all the way back to Forepaw to buy some more. This new path eventually led to another town called Victim. Here I bought some better armor as well as a new tier of keys, King Keys. I also learned about some kind of magic cane, and that holding a piece of meteorite will turn the meteorite into black onyx for some reason. I explored to the east some more, and man, this place just kept going. I found an old man who taught me the spell of fire, but it's actually weaker than the thunder spell I bought earlier. Great. I also found a guy who said that I could find some meteorite in a place called the Tower of Mist, and he told me that once I find the meteorite, I should return back to him. I found a few dungeons that required king keys, and even a door that required an ace key, a key type I hadn't seen yet. However, before exploring any of these new dungeons, I decided to go back and try to conquer the Tower of Suffer first. Man, without being able to cheese them, these gargoyle guys are just so nasty. I basically just had to bring a bunch of potions with me to stand a chance. There were 2 of them in a row here, and past them was the item of the dungeon, the pendant. I didn't realize what this did at first, but according to the manual, this thing increases your sword's attack power. Nice, that should be helpful. Except it wasn't at all. This item is actually totally bugged. By mistake, the devs had the item active by default when you first start the game, and collecting the pendant turns the item off. It's actually a permanent debuff. I climbed this whole darn tower just to become weaker. Man, this place really is the Tower of Suffer. Anyway, after this, I opened one of those king doors, and behind it was a small dungeon that didn't seem to have anything. However, behind the other king door I found was the Tower of Mist. This is the one that supposedly had a piece of a meteorite somewhere in it. There were some more nasty enemies here, including more of those gargoyle guys, and eventually I found the boss. This guy just jumps around everywhere, and it's kind of hard to hit him safely. I used up a ton of resources, but eventually I took him out and got the black onyx. I showed the onyx to that one guy from earlier, and he gave me the ace key. This let me open the door I saw before, and beyond it was the next section. The mist area was complete, and now it was time for the branches. Once again, this section looked different and had some new enemies. After wandering around for a bit, I found the town of Conflate. Here, there was a better sword and shield, and I couldn't afford either of them, even with the respawn cheese. In this town, I learned that it used to be a trading town that traded peacefully with the nearby dwarf kingdom. Looking at the manual, it looks like the branches hang close to a nearby cliff where the dwarfs live. Anyway, I left to wander some more and randomly encountered the boss of the Tower of Mist again. He whooped me this time, and I decided to just grind for the new gear before fighting him again. I also decided to backtrack a ton in order to buy the death spell and that magical shield from that shop all the way back at the start of the game. After this, I challenged that boss again, and the death spell whooped him. He dropped the battle helmet, but sadly I couldn't even use it yet. It actually works as the final upgrade to the shield, but for some reason you can't equip it until you find the best weapon in the game, the Dragon Slayer. After wandering around a bunch more, I found another one of those bosses, and he dropped the battle armor. This was similar to the helmet in that it was the best armor in the game, but I couldn't equip it until I got the Dragon Slayer. I also randomly found the magical rod that was mentioned earlier, and it increases the damage of spells. I'm skipping over a lot here, but this branch area was pretty mazy and was full of all kinds of tough enemies. Eventually, I found the Town of Daybreak, and here was the most powerful spell in the game, Tilt. This spell was good, but it also cost a ton of MP. Most of the people here just talked about the magical cane I had already found, although one person suggested that I was apparently a famous warrior. Huh, I didn't even realize that. Maybe that's why the king sent me on this journey to begin with. After talking to everyone, I went east and found a locked door that apparently required some kind of ring that I didn't have. Great, I had no idea where to go next. I got stuck here for a while. I just wandered around the branches for forever looking for the ring. It took me a while, but I finally figured it out. I had to talk to the guru back in Conflate after obtaining the battle armor and the battle helmet. When I did this, he told me about the Dragon Slayer sword and gave me the ring of dwarf. Anyway, using this ring, I was able to get past that door and the branch area was complete. Up next was the final area, the Dwarf Kingdom, which the manual just calls the Evil Place. I've stepped off the branches here and into the nearby cliffs. Here, I found more of those homes that housed bad guys, although I eventually found a secret peaceful town called Dartmoor. I could stock up on potions here, and the only real hint I got was that there's a guru somewhere in the castle. I wandered around the mazy area a bunch, and I stumbled onto another door that required a ring, and apparently my dwarf ring was not the right one. I also received a hint from some peaceful people, and they told me that the Dragon Slayer was in the hands of the Dwarf King. Eventually, I found that castle that the townsperson spoke of, which led me to the game's penultimate dungeon. This dungeon is full of nasty enemies, and it has a weird loop that really confused me at first. After wandering around, I found the guru that was mentioned before. I was hoping he'd give me a ring or something, but he just told me that the dwarves apparently regard the meteorite as a messenger, and he reiterated that the meteorite was poisoning the water. He explained that the meteorite was what was causing the dwarves to turn evil. At the end of this dungeon was the Dwarf King himself, a giant dragon. Ah yes, just how I imagine a Dwarf King would look. To my surprise, this guy took me out in only 2 hits. Yeesh. This boss took everything I had to defeat. I had to constantly drink potions just to stay alive. However, with almost no resources left, I defeated him. He dropped the Dragon Slayer sword, which finally let me equip all of that armor I got earlier. Nice. If only they gave me the Dragon Slayer before the one dragon I had to fight in the game. With this sword in hand, I had to return to the guru in the castle, and he gave me the final ring, the Demon's Ring. He also explained that someone called the Evil One turned the king into a dragon. Wait, is that why all the dwarfs look like monsters in this game? Anyway, with this ring, I could open that door from earlier, and I entered the final dungeon, a fortress called Xanadu. This dungeon was so confusing, as it featured tons of tricky to navigate rooms, and screens with transitions that intertwined with each other in ways that didn't make sense. It's kind of hard to showcase with just a bunch of short clips, but as an example, it was possible to fall down a pit, move left a few screens, and then end up back in the room with the pit. The objective here was just to find the final boss. It took me a while, but after skipping past one of those nasty yellow guys again, I found him, the Evil One. Whoa, this dude just looks like a skull with legs. Thankfully, he didn't seem to do too much damage, and I was able to just stand in the corner and get a bunch of jumping attacks in on him, and he went down with little effort. Man, that dragon guy was way more difficult. With that, I returned to the king, and he told me that the elves and the dwarves would live peacefully together once again. The game ends with your character embarking on a journey once more, although now the scenery looks far more luscious as the water flows freely once again. With that, Faxanadu was complete. On to the review. So, is this better than Zelda 2? Well, I don't really think so, although it's not too far off. I like how mazy and large the world feels, and, unlike something like Metroid, each individual room feels a bit more uniquely designed here. I think this whole exploration aspect is where this game shines for me, as I found it a lot of fun to explore the world tree's intricate branches and dungeons. It's got a pretty interesting atmosphere too, with the whole theme of climbing a massive tree that has been poisoned and dried up. Now, where this game falls a bit short is that it just feels a bit rough around the edges. Collisions are awkward, enemy placements can be annoying when changing screens, and the pendant in particular stands out as a pretty egregious bug. A lot of the bosses kind of just came down to spamming attacks before you ran out of potions too, which didn't make them super interesting. That all being said, I think despite my issues with the game, I still think it's pretty neat, and it's one of my more favorite third-party games in the challenge so far. It may have some rough edges, but I enjoyed wandering through the game's complex terrain and discovering its secrets. I gave the game an 8 out of 10. With Faxanadu complete, I have now finished 59 out of the 148 NES games in the challenge, meaning I am now 39.86% of the way through all of the NES games. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.